So here we have a simple form with only 2 input fields. But as the number of input fields in our form increases, our code starts to get more complex. For every field, we have to declare a state variable, and then we have to write code to validate that variable. All of this can become a bit painful. This is where we use a popular library called Formik. I love their tagline: build forms in React without the tears. So Formik takes care of all the complexity of building forms. It keeps track of form state, and it gives us validation out of the box. It works with React and React Native, so chances are you're already familiar with it. In this lesson, we're going to have a quick look at Formik because it is possible that the next React Native project you get is already implemented with Formik. It's very popular, so you should know what it is and how it works. In this lesson, we're just going to cover the basics. If you want to learn more, you need to read Formik's documentation. So here in the terminal, let's install Formik version 2.1.4. This is the latest version at the time of recording this video. If you're coding along with me, use the same version so there are no surprises while you're coding along. Okay, let's go with that. Formik is installed, beautiful. Now, in our login screen on the top, we should import Formik from Formik. Note that this is not a default export. It's a named export, so we have to wrap it in between braces. Now, the first time you use Formik, you may get slightly confused, but trust me, this is only the first time. Once you start using Formik and get hang of it, you're going to love it. You will use it in every project. So let's see how we can use the Formik component. So after our image, I'm going to add a Formik component. Now this component has a couple of props we have to set. The first one is initial values. We set this to an object with initial values for our form. So here we have 2 input fields, email and password. Let's set email and password to an empty string. Initial values, okay? The second prop we have to set is onSubmit. We set this to a function that determines what should happen when we submit the form. So in the future, we're going to call the server and send our credentials. For now, we're just going to log something to the console. So here we pass a function. This function takes an object that represents the values in the form. Now we get that and log it to the console. Okay? Now, inside the Formik component, we should add braces because here we should pass a function. So this is what I was telling you earlier. The syntax is slightly unfamiliar. So instead of passing direct children here, we should pass a function. This function has an argument. We can destructure it and pick a couple of important properties. One of them is handle change. The other is handle submit. There are more properties. You're going to learn about them as we go through the course. So these two are functions that Formik gives us. And with this, we can keep track of form state and submit it. Let me show you. So our function should return a JSX expression. So here I use parentheses so we can break down our JSX into multiple lines. Now, a function in React, as you know, should return a single element or a single component. But here we have multiple elements. We have multiple components, 2 input fields and a button. So we should wrap this inside a fragment or empty angle brackets. Now, inside this, we're going to move our input fields and buttons. So let's select all the code up to this point, cut, and then paste it over here. Save. Let's see what we have. So here's our Formik component. It has 2 props, initial values and onSubmit. Inside this, we have braces because we're passing a function. Over here, we have destructured the argument of this function. So we pick 2 properties, handle change and handle submit. And then we return a JSX expression. Our JSX contains a fragment and our input fields. So where are we going to use these functions? We're going to use handle change right here. When we subscribe to the change text event of our input field. So instead of this function, we're going to call handle change and specify the name of our input field. In this case, email. So I'm using email here because that is the property I used when supplying the initial values. Okay. Now, similarly, for our password field, we're going to replace this function with handle change and give it password. And finally, for our button, we're going to set onPress to handle submit. This will cause the form to be submitted. Okay. When the form is submitted, we're going to end up right here. This is the function that gets called when the form is submitted. Now let me show you something. Look, these two state variables are no longer needed because Formik tracks our form state. This is one of the benefits of Formik. So if you had a form with 5 fields, without Formik, we would have to create 5 state variables to track our form state. With Formik, we don't have to do that. We let Formik track our form state, okay? So let's delete these 2 lines. That also means we don't need the state hook anymore. Okay, so our code is cleaner. We're done with the first step. Next, we're going to talk about validation.